keep moving along here. We've got another panel. This one, of course, is about the NFBC. I guess I got to be learning this one if I am going to be helping out GoVA at all at the NFBC. So we got to bring in the big guns. We've got Rob, we've got Jenny, we've got Dave. Oh man, this is a knockout crew. I'm just gonna get out of here. Thank you so much for participating at PitchCon, and I can't wait for this panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. All right. Well, welcome everybody. I want to thank Nick and PitcherList for having us here and contributing to such a wonderful cause and helping us further our knowledge in baseball and fantasy baseball. Today, I have two special guests with me on this panel, Mr. Dave Potts and Mr. Jenny Butler. How you guys doing today?
Jenny, you're muted there.
Thank you. I didn't want to accidentally say anything while Nick was introducing us. No, I'm good. I'm good. How are you? I apparently am not in as fun a location as Dave is. That's where we all want to be.
It's a beautiful day. Like I was worried it would be cold out here today.
Yeah, it's nice.
January in Cleveland, but it is beautiful. In fact, Jim Tome's back. It's a great day.
Awesome. So we're going to be telling everyone a brief overview about the NFBC today. Just before we get into that, I'd like to just give a brief introduction to everyone for Jenny and Dave. Jenny, you can find Jenny on Twitter at Jenny Butler 830. She's a fantasy contributor for Fantrax and Rotoballer. She contributes as well to the FTN Draft Guide, and she's cashed in nearly 40% of her NFBC leagues. Dave Potts, you can find him doing work at rotogrinders.com, at Dave Potts2 on Twitter. He also cashed in nearly 40% of his leagues on the NFBC, the main event overall winner in 2012, as well as being in the NFBC Hall of Fame. And so we're going to get a lot of knowledge here from us and trying to give you a brief overview about the NFBC. I figured we started with just an introduction into the general formats that are available and trying to get to know the best path to pick the best league for you. So let's start with the leagues with the overall prizes, and let's start with some draft and holds. That this is no fab. You're going to be picking 50 rounds of players with no in-season moves. You still have to set your lineups twice a week for batters and once a week for pitchers. So let's talk about the NFBC 50 first, which is a 12-team league, 50-round drafts. Jenny, do you have any experience in the 50s?
I have not played the 50s. I've played the draft champions. So I mean, for the most part, I think they can be treated more the same. There's just a slightly deeper player pool with the draft champions. But, the strategy and the drafting and the management of the team in season is pretty much the same.
Yeah, I think in general, like the draft champions leagues are one of the best ways to really prep and dig into the player pool if you want to, depending on your budget. Like that can be an expensive way to prep, but when you draft for 2 weeks, you have time to really dig into plays that you don't otherwise. Like I noticed when you get down to the 20th round, you really spend time. You've got these 5 players you want to choose between. This is the time you can really figure out which of these guys you want and why. And it's easier to focus in on that when you're actually drafting the guy rather than just kind of theoretically, oh, here's this list of 5 players. Who do I like?
Right. Absolutely. Do you guys feel like there's any specific main strategy into when you can't do fab? Like what's the biggest part of trying to, put together a good roster when you can't make in-season moves?
I think for me, a lot of it is about making sure that I have all my positions covered, making sure I keep a spreadsheet during the draft that has a list of the players that I've drafted and what positions they're eligible at, so that I can make sure that I like to get personally at least 4 of every infield position and 10, 11 outfielders, and whatever that leaves with pitchers, maybe 21, 22. And if you add that up, that's more than 50 rounds. But again, in a draft champions, getting guys, or best ball, getting guys who have multi-position eligibility can be really helpful, because you can cover your positions that way. And it will really come in handy when you have 15 injuries out of 50 players and you need somebody to cover second base on a random Friday.
And give like a triple, quadruple boost to multi-position eligible players. And like what she said, like you want to have 4 players at each position. If you have a couple guys that can play 3 infield positions, that's way more of a big deal than it is in like a main event or something like that.
Right, absolutely. Now these both of these formats had well over 3,000 contestants. The DC had 4,815 contestants last year, so it's a large pool to try to beat the overall. But it's definitely worth trying for if you get a couple of tries at it. Jenny, I know you have experience in some best ball leagues as well, right?
Yeah, the best ball format on NFBC, I actually really like. I think that they started out with just the cut lines, which is a best ball format, but it does involve a little bit of fab. So they have 2 fab deadlines during the season, one a couple weeks into the season, and then one at the beginning of June. And that gives you a chance to switch out some of your players. Those fabs are involved and will take longer than your average fab. So you only have to do it twice, but it's going to take longer. You need to make lists of, maybe 30 players, because you need to make sure that you get somebody, especially if you have somebody who's injured, and especially in that second fab run. But the cut lines are 10 teams. All of the best balls are points leagues at NFBC, and the regular best balls, not the cut line ones, but the regular ones, have no in-season moves at all. So you can draft and basically just forget your team, which I think is nice. I don't like to spend time setting lineups. Some people that do 30 draft champions, I don't understand how they do it. It takes me a decent amount of time to set a lineup. So I'm not
Nick to set their lineups for them.
Yeah, there you go. That's what we need him for. But so I think the best balls are nice in that you can just draft and forget it. The scoring for points leagues for NFBC is a little bit different probably than what you're going to see on other sites. It was developed to sort of mimic the Roto rankings. So it is more like an average. So there's no points for walks, for instance. So you're drafting based on more of like an average hitter rather than an OBP hitter and things like that. So I think that it's, if people say, oh, that's points, that's not a good draft prep for me. I think because of the way the point system is configured, that it actually is a good draft prep, similar to a DC. I also use that as draft prep, and I think it works pretty well for Roto leagues also.
Yeah, I want to add on to that, like, because of the way the scoring, like you said, it's so close. Like, it was supposed to emulate 5x5 as close as possible. So like, you don't need just an entirely different list, which is great. One other thing, just to jump back real quick to the draft champions, you mentioned how many teams are in it. And like the overall, it's like 40K to first. Second place drops all the way to $8,000. Realistically, as good as you may be, you're probably not going to win the overall. Like, I think there's a lot of value to just playing for your league in that. And like, the main event, there's 500 teams for $200,000. Like, you play to win that. But this, I think you can go overboard. Like, I think it's fine to punt saves in that if you want to. Like, you're not going to win the overall anyway. I mean, sure, somebody is.
Well, he is.
But
Rob is.
Like, theoretically, I don't think you just have to play for that in the way that's like the goal in the main event.
The one draft champions that I generally play, I do maybe one or two $150 ones, but if you have the bankroll for it, if you play the more expensive draft champions, every draft champions has the same amount of your entry fee going to the overall. So when you have a higher price point of entry fee, more of your money is going to the league prize. So if I usually will do $1,000 draft champions per season, maybe this year I'll do 2. But I treat those as standalone leagues. Last year, I fully punted saves in mine, and I got second and was one Francisco Lindor single away from getting first with fully punting saves. Finished.
Unbelievable.
Oh, he
Just
was
one
he
time
was
to
on
keep us
somebody
fired
else's
harder.
team.
We
I
would've
needed
done
him
that.
to get a hit so that somebody else would pass the guy in first. You know how that goes. But yeah, so I think that, you know, you can absolutely treat them as a standalone league, especially if they're a higher price point, because you aren't giving that big of a percentage of your entry fee to the overall.
Absolutely. Yeah. The year that I won, it was my first time playing, and I played to win the league. I did pretty much what Dave said. I didn't punt saves, but I drafted my first closer, I think in the 13th round, was Keona Keela. And then I waited and I got Matt Barnes and Ryan Presley, and they ended up getting the jobs pretty shortly into the season. And you could just fall into that easily. But I think, yeah, Dave, that's a great point. It's such a good play to just play your league. And, you know, if you draft a balanced team and, you know, you just, everything goes right, it can lead to possible overall
Yeah, like you
success. And
say,
I
if you
think,
just fall into those two closers late, like all of a sudden you are in competition for it.
right. And I think people make the mistake of thinking too that you always need to shoot for upside to win the overalls and all the overalls in general. And I just think that's false. You know, I don't think you have to shoot for this high upside, risky, maybe type player.
I'm close to making just going crazy of saying no one's allowed to use the word upside anymore. Like it's gotten out of control, you know. And you're so right. Like people just make up this word like it means something and don't draft good players anymore. But carry on. I'll soapbox later.
I was really happy to hear on your megapod about that Phil and those guys said the same thing, because every time I hear, oh, this guy's good, you know, if you're trying to go for the overall, I yell at my phone every time I hear somebody say that, because in my experience, looking at the teams that win, that's not how you win.
Right. I think you should make a video of all the time that you scream into your phone and show.
It would be too many. It would be too many.
Absolutely. Okay, so now let's briefly go to the main event, which is a $1,700 entry league. There was 705 participants in it last year. The overall prize has gone up from 150,000 to 200,000 this year. How many leagues do you try to play in the main event, and what's your number one approach to getting the best you can out of the season?
So I usually play two. Some years I've played one, and then I've gradually sort of increased to two with my bankroll getting a little bit higher. I personally have only ever drafted live in the main event, live in Vegas. I much prefer to draft live, so you can only do so many that way. But you know, this year I actually might do one online. We'll see. But just in general, I think that you need to be aware that everybody is playing for the overall. Everybody is sort of going into it with the same mindset that you are. And so, you know, we hear it all the time, but you know, in some sense, ADP goes out the window. That's a little bit of an overused term, I think, but it's a little bit more, you're not sneaking anything by anyone in the main event. So if you have a strong opinion about someone, you might need to go a little bit earlier than where they have been going so far.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's something you'll hear people say a lot, and it's so completely true. Like that's one. Well, I think no one should be allowed to say the word upside. I think people should be allowed to say you throw ADP out the window in the main event, partly because everyone else does. Like there are a lot of people who pretty much only play the main event, or they do so many leagues elsewhere that they're not really drafting their players per se. They're just getting, you know, a portfolio of what they want. Basically, there's no such thing as the guy that people are, you know, sneaking in the 8th round, and every single person everywhere is saying, I love this guy, I'm gonna get him in the 8th round. He'll go in the 5th round. Like, just, you know, cut it out.
Right. And I think my first main event experience was a real big shock to the system, because you know, if you're gonna play in one the first time, just prepare that if you're anticipating jumping that ADP. I remember the first guys, Nick Castellanos and Lance Lynn, I had them written down. I was going to, you know, I looked at their ADP and I was going to jump it by like 10, 15 picks, and someone jumped my 10, 15 pick anticipation. So yeah. And you have to be ready to pivot. And that was my mistake. I wasn't ready. I felt like I got punched in the gut twice. and I didn't recover for a couple of rounds. I mean, I'm not ashamed to say that. It was just, I didn't know what to do. I was staring at my computer screen, just completely miserable that happened to me. But that's what you have to expect in those drafts for sure.
You have this, I think, written somewhere on later on the outline. But speaking of jumping picks, since you just said that, I'll jump it now.
Yeah.
Yeah, it takes one. I think almost everybody has that experience once. I had that same thing my first main event. I had this glorious plan for my first 2 rounds. I was like, obviously, I'm going to get these 2 guys, and I got neither of them. And by the 3rd round, I had no idea who I was trying to take and what was happening. Like, make yourself a very in-depth chart and list for at least the first 4 rounds of every possible scenario that you could get to. Like, if your 2nd round pick is pick number 30, don't assume you're going to get one of your first 29 players. Like, you really might not. Like, make that plan for everything goes opposite of what you think. And like, I think in the outline, you use the term like a spider chart, where you like map, like, okay, if this and this is what I want, if not, I'll get this and this, then this and this, and then my hands disappear, and then it's that kind of thing. But you will get punched in the face at least once, and if you haven't, you should. Everyone should get punched in the face.
And Jenny actually does that for the FTN draft guide the last 2 years, right, Jenny?
She punches people in the face.
She punches people. She punches
whenever I can. Yes. No, I did for this shameless plug for the FTN draft guide. For the last 2 years, I've put in some examples of flow charts that you can make for yourself. I personally have them split between pitchers. You can split up starters and relievers, and then speed and power. And I, separate guys into those categories and sort of look at what my options are for each round. And when I make that flow chart, I list people above their ADP, earlier than their ADP, because I am preparing for the main event. So, and the reason that I even started doing this is because, I got punched in the face in the main event. I drafted my first year. I remember drafting a guy who I thought was going to be the closer. It was Sung-Won Oh, who was going to be the closer for St. Louis. And then right in the middle of the draft, maybe 3 rounds later, somebody else drafts a different reliever from St. Louis. And I quickly look it up, and there had been an announcement like earlier that morning that he was the favorite to be the closer. And I had just wasted a pick, and it threw me off completely. I did the same thing 2 years later. I drafted in 2019. It was my first time at the big Saturday morning main event. And it's such a distraction there that I didn't sit down for 10 minutes before the draft started to look at the news. And I didn't see that Scooter Gennett had gotten hurt the day before in a spring training game. And I drafted him in the 8th round, and somebody, slides their phone over to me with a headline on it that says he's out 8 to 12 weeks. And again, the whole time we had a break right after that, and the whole time I was, thinking about it and what am I going to do? And then I immediately, with my 11th round pick, overcompensated for that and was off after that. And so I just thought to myself, I've got to have a plan for when things don't go the way I think they're going to go. So by doing these flow charts, I think not only does it help you come up with your plan A, but it also spells out your plans B, C, and D when plan A doesn't work, so that nothing takes you by surprise. And you may not be happy that this guy got taken before you thought he would, but at least you're not surprised by it and you're not thrown off by it, and you can adapt a little bit quicker.
Yep. I think that's excellent, Jenny. I think it's definitely necessary to do that and know which ways that you want to go. And I think, it doesn't have to be for the whole draft, but you have to try to have a decision for at least the first 4 or 5, because after that, sometimes try to map too far ahead of time. I feel like I get too stuck in that this is what I thought I was going to do, and I don't become flexible and malleable. And that's something I'm working on being, better at. And that's because I tried to map out too far. So that's just at least what it worked for me. Our last 2 formats that have overall components to it, we have the 12-team online championship and also the 2 auction leagues that are available. One is an online auction league, and the other one is the auction championship league. The auction championship, you can find a range of $1,500 leagues to $2,500 league. There's 135 people in the overall last year for that. And for the online auctions, you'll get about 600 people usually in the overall there, and the price points are about $150. You guys want to talk about either one of these formats?
I'll leave the online championship talk for you guys because I don't play in that. But I have been playing in the auction championship for the last couple of seasons. The NFBC has a great draft software or auction software, sorry. And I really like using it, but I, again, much prefer a live draft. So I've been doing live auctions in Vegas the last couple of years. And I think that they're great. You know, I think that you're not a slave to ADP that way. You know, you have an opportunity to get any guy that you want. You know, last year, both of my main events, I drew KD. I didn't have my KDS set any strange way, but I got pick 12 in both of my main events. And I was in a position where the first, 10, 11 guys that were going off the board, I had no chance at any of them. So in an auction, you can really get who you want. You're going to pay for it, but you can get who you want. And I really like that aspect of it.
Absolutely. It's
Yeah,
definitely.
if you've never done a live auction, like if you have the means, like do a live auction. It's fantastic. And as far as winning an overall, that's the fewest amount of teams you'll have to compete against to try to win an overall. Like it's much more doable with 135 teams than with the 28,000 teams in the online championship.
Absolutely.
Next.
And I think it gives you a good ability to also, with that lesser crowd, and to try to play for that overall. And it's also a different format, so you can totally pivot from how you draft, how you would snake draft. Maybe you always are looking at a certain cluster of guys in round 5, let's just say, and you like 4 or 5 of them. Like last year on me, it was pitchers from pick 70 to 80. It was just the Musgroves, the Dylan Cease, the Kevin Gausmans. And every time I did a snake draft, I wanted all of them. So when I did my auction, I was like thrilled that I could just, spend $20 on all 3 of them and get them all. And, that totally plays into that overall component too. Dave, do you tend to do more of a balanced strategy instead of like trying to like punt in an auction style league?
Generally speaking, yes.
Yeah.
I'm more of the balanced rather than stars and scrubs. I usually have a couple of guys that, like, if this guy goes under $35, then I'll get a couple. But yeah, generally I'm the guy just kind of sitting around waiting and getting all the $18 players in the middle.
Yep.
And something Jenny mentioned, that the software for the online auctions, it really is good. Like, you don't have to, as long as you know how to use a computer, which I don't know if I do yet, but I can still do an online auction. And they start at $150. Like,
yeah.
Before you sign up for a whole bunch, do one, because they take a long time. Like, it's very intensive. Like, you'll be super tired after one. But if you like doing it online, I think you will. Like, you can do several at those price points. And especially if you're doing a live auction, it's good to have at least one practice.
Yep, it's definitely a great price point. I tried in the last 2 years. I did a couple, and I really enjoyed it. The software is great, and one thing I think is key to tell people is that you have to draft your legal lineup with your first 23. Yes. Like, with the 23 players you bid on, it has to be your starting team, and then it's a 7-round snake reserve. And what's different from it is if you're coming from a draft and hold league specifically, where you're, maybe you don't get your first catcher until round 25. Now you have to get both of them in that round 23. So when you go into that reserve round, the board looks completely different as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I didn't actually think about, last year was the first year I did a live auction, and I didn't think about it until about an hour before. And I was in a frenzy thinking, like, what does this mean? What do I have to do? But you also will get, I would say, maybe a few less pitchers in the auction than you would see in a snake draft, because you can only take 9. Weird note about Shohei Ohtani too. You can also move him back and forth between your utility or a pitcher, however you see fit, during the auction, to help you maybe take an extra pitcher, put him in utility, take an extra hitter, put him in as a pitcher, and then just move him, throughout the season.
Yep, absolutely. And one final thing I'll say is to make sure you use the NFBC AAV, the average auction values, and convert any ADP also into a money value too. You can find a formula on that on Baseball HQ Forecaster or The Process by Jeff Zimmerman and Tanner Bell. They both have formulas to convert NFBC ADP into AAV if you want a larger sample size for a draft. That's just, you know, like right now, if you did an auction draft, there's only 3 or 4 drafts you could look at the prices for. And the online championship is a 12-team format, 30 rounds, I guess 7 on the reserve. And last year there was 2,388 teams in the overall. The price points range from $350 all the way up to $2,500 leagues. Dave, you participate in the 12-team leagues as well?
I do not anymore. It's, I mean, I think they're great, and I used to play a bunch, but like the Fab is more time intensive because there's so many more players available. There's more players you're going to be willing to cut. I'm just out of time and patience. Like I'm getting old and I'm getting cranky, and like it cuts into my ice cream time. So no, I do not. But that's not to say that I don't think they're great leagues. And by all means, you should play in them. And you have my permission to win.
The Fab thing is huge because 2 years ago when I played in my first league, I really suffered in holding guys too long, you know, because coming from a 15-team league mindset, you know, a guy like Ian Happ who was struggling, you know, but he still trusted his skill set. And in a 15-team league, you're not dropping him. But in the 12-team, I just held on to him too long. I didn't cycle through and maximize my at-bats during the week. And, I reached out to like several players who would do well in the online championships. And that's what the main thing was. Like I showed them the roster, like, you got to get rid of this guy. You got to get rid of that guy. And it's totally different. And like you mentioned, Dave, that free agent pool becomes a lot bigger, and it's more time you got to put into that for sure.
It's so tough. Like if you're someone who like I stream starters a lot. Well, in a 15-teamer, there's only a small handful of like 2-start guys I have to look into. In a 12-teamer, I mean, it's every week you know, should I cut these 4 guys that I really like to play this kind of okay 2-start pitcher? And again, just I'm gonna go to a movie or eat some ice cream and let you guys do that now. But it's a great format, and I hope you win.
Yep, absolutely. I think that last year my strategy was actually I drafted a lot of bats first, and then I just went full steam ahead with a huge starting pitching staff. And my plan was to not have to stream off the wire and just stream from my bench. And if I did want to go to the wire, I'd be picky about my the 2-week start, the 2-spot. I can't even talk 2-start weeks. And then you can at least just worry about streaming hitters. Just worry about, you know, it worked because I drafted the right pitchers, but you know, that's what has to happen for it to work. As you would say, you know, any strategy works when you draft the right players. The 2 non-overall leagues that are available on the NFBC, they have satellite leagues, 12-team and 15-team leagues that range from $125 to $500. And the high stakes leagues is pretty much the highest of highest stakes on the NFBC. Leagues go up to $15,000 per entry in those leagues. Dave, which high stakes league do you usually play in?
So I am actually cutting those out this year as well. Quite honestly, I'm almost retired. Okay. I'm down to the main event in the auction. Basically, like really, honestly, I'm getting old and I'm getting tired. So I know I'm not putting in as much work as I used to. I'm not going to pay $15,000 to maybe take a week off. That's really what it comes down to. In the past, I played in all of them, you know, platinums, ultimates. And if you can afford to, the thing is the payouts are way better. Like you're not paying much rake, like they pay out most of it to the league. And it's kind of a not, I think misnomer's a real word. It's kind of a misnomer that they're harder than any other league. They're not. It's the same people. The only difference being theoretically everyone tries all year. You're not going to get 2 or 3 teams kind of stop fabbing, but they're not any harder. It's the same people.
Do you feel any more
standalone? Sorry.
Oh, I'm saying I just want to ask, do you feel any more pressure because the stakes are obviously higher? So do you feel like every fab move that you make or every lineup move that you make, like a little more tension about it, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. It's something I talk about in DFS all the time, and it's the same with this. Like everyone has their money level at which anything over that, you're going to be more stressed out, which is honestly probably the sign you should not play in that league. Like that's kind of the way I view it. Like if you're going to lose sleep over, I should have picked up that guy instead of that guy. I don't know. I would say don't.
Makes sense. Okay, so we're just gonna do some tips and tricks of like how to use the website in general. We'll start right off from signing up for a draft and then setting your KDS. The lobby on the FBC has all the draft available there. They have a live chat. The admin helps you with any questions. And then there's a tab for contest sign up that will show you every league that's been signed up for already and who's involved in them. So some people like to be a little, careful of the leagues they elect and try to stay away from certain players. So that's one thing I would say that you can kind of see who's in the league. And then once you're in the league, setting your KDS is another big thing. That's your first step before your actual draft starts. And then
setting KDS is an important step, I think. You can always leave it straight, if that's the way you like it. You don't have to touch it, but I think taking a look at the player pool and where, not just who you want in the first round, but who you want in rounds 2 and 3, maybe. Don't need to go too much further than that because, ADP gets kind of jumbled. But, taking a look at what that might get you in later rounds is a pretty good idea. And I also like to set mine, if I'm going to do 2 main events, I like to set my KDS differently to try not to have the same pick in both of them.
Yeah, the more leagues you do, the more you want to probably spread out your KDS, especially like if you're doing a whole bunch of like the 12 teamers, like some people will play, 20, 12 teamers. That's an easy way to just make sure you're not doing the same thing in those first few rounds. Because generally, everyone has the same sort of list of the top 30 players, maybe in a little different order, but you're not really doing anything wrong to get any of those guys. And you probably want to, if you've got a bunch of teams, split it up a little bit. In the main event, if you have 1 or even 2 teams, I think it's fine to just say this is what I'm doing and stick with it.
Right. Absolutely. Once you hop into a draft room, Jenny, what are some things that we could use to help us in the draft room?
Yeah, there's a few features that I think can be really helpful, especially for me for slow drafts. They allow you to put in a custom rank list. So you can download their list of players, reorder it however you want, and then re-upload it with a custom name. And then you can sort the draft room based on that. I think it's really helpful for one thing early in this draft season, because a lot of times last year's draft list will be there. But also I like to use it, anytime I'm getting in a draft, I like to take the current ADP for that specific format and with the most recent drafts and reorder the rank list that way and just have a list that's just purely ADP so that, and I sort my room that way. And then I'll take a rankings list and an ADP list, import them both, and then I can toggle between them to sort of see how my guys are comparing to ADP, which is easier for me because when I draft live in March, I have a spreadsheet that I work off of. But in a slow draft, you could be drafting, from a restaurant or from the movies or from the ice cream shop, and you'll
recommend that.
Easier to find the players that you want that way if you have your own custom rankings set up.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I so much endorse that. Like if you only do one thing to prep for a draft, like set up your ranking lists, especially in a live, not live in person, but a draft like a 12-teamer where you have a minute between picks. Like sometimes it starts going pretty fast at the end, and you may kind of know, you may even have a sheet of paper you're looking at or software, but to find the guys you want, it can get a little stressful at times. Like if you have your list as that default, it makes a huge difference. So like take the time to do that. It seems like a lot of work, it doesn't matter. I know what I'm going to do in the 18th round, but I know it's made a difference for me several times where like to see my list there as opposed to that default list and then you have a bunch of guys that got hurt yesterday, and if you didn't change your list, then they're sitting there and you have to X them out, or they're there the whole draft. And there's a lot of ways it can be annoying. So yes, make your list.
Yep. And there's also an interesting way you can set your queue for each round, where you can go to a specific round and set your queue for that round as well. So maybe, on a slow draft, you're coming up at the nighttime and you want to just kind of have an easy rollout to where you want to go while you're not going to be away from your computer and whatnot. And so that's a pretty good tool that you can utilize as well.
Yeah, I think sorry. I was just going to say, I think that tool is really helpful when you're on the turn, because if you want to set yourself on auto draft, say you want a pitcher and a hitter, it's easier to have an entire list of pitchers and an entire list of hitters rather than trying to somehow guess what order they're going to go in. And maybe you'll get 2 hitters or 2 pitchers. So this way you can, just set your auto draft and it'll specifically get who you want.
Yep. Makes sense. Once we get into the season, Fab is a huge thing, as Dave mentioned before. Time consuming. You want to consolidate as much as you can. You want to do as quick as you can. The NFBC has rolled out a new Fab page where now you can conduct your Fab for multiple teams on the pending Fab page. So you'll be able to assign labels, which I think is the most awesome part of it. If you could just label it 1 week hitting streamers or 2 start pitchers, spec saves, and you can work your list from there and then copy those bids to any league that you want, which I think is pretty cool. So I'm actually excited to use it. Can't use it yet. It doesn't work as good as in a basketball league. I'm in a basketball league and it's just not as fun as baseball. I've only had like a 3-player Fab
and that's
list.
not just because of Fab, it's because it's just not as fun as baseball.
Yes, 100%
right there. Yeah,
100% right. Yeah, but what are some of the Fab tips that you guys like to utilize?
I think that this new room is going to be interesting because it involves using your watch list, and I'm going to have to do some thinking about that, about how. Because I use my watch list generally for players who I'm kind of watching long-term. I don't really use it for my Fab. So, if I'm looking at somebody who I think is a potential closer in waiting or something like that, I just kind of keep them on the watch list to just sort of keep an eye on what they're doing. So involving your watch list in this new Fab format is, I just think I might need to, rethink how I'm using my watch list.
Yeah, it's going to be a little different. And if you're on the NFBC's mailing list, like they sent out an email just a couple of days ago that links to a video where Greg and Derek kind of walk through what it's going to look like. So I would recommend watching that. And I'm assuming that they'll have the free agent page also the same as it was last year, where you can kind of go back and forth. And my plan is to start using the new page, but not kind of as my main thing. Like on Sunday night at Fab Time, I'm still going to be on the original page, assuming that's there. But I do, that's, especially if you have a bunch of teams, it's going to be really useful to be able to get them all in one place and use those watch lists like that. But look for that video. And if you're not on the mailing list, like I know Greg Ambrosius put on it, it's on, you can find it from his Twitter page. They'll kind of walk you through it.
Rob's all over it. He just put a link in the chat. So
I didn't know that was the thing.
He's all over it. But another thing that I like to do in Fab, it's something that I actually just started doing maybe last year or the year before, is when you go into the Fab page, there's a download button there, and you can download the full player list specifically from your league. So it includes who is rostering that player and things like that. So I use it to pull into my spreadsheet with, stats and things, so that I have a list of who's available in my league. And then I can populate it with stats either for the upcoming week, rest of season, things like that. And I look at it that way rather than actually looking at the list in the Fab page, because I can sort it better and filter it better that way.
Jenny is also from the future. I am from the past, and that sounds fantastic. I've not done that. That's one of the things I'll have Nick do for me this year while he is.
Absolutely.
One thing to utilize once Fab is completed in your league is to have a great player movement tab where you can actually see in every single format, every single player that was bid on, who was dropped, how much they were bid on for, and who picked them up and who dropped specific players. So if you wanted to see who Dave Potts is picking up and dropping, you can look at that. And I think it's a good tool if you want to just observe Fab and just get to know like what the price points are, what a 2-star pitcher is going for, and you could just scan multiple leagues across every single format. So I really like
something on what you're talking about right there. I think what tends to happen in the main event specifically is each league sort of ends up forming its own. This is what this kind of guy costs,
Yeah.
and it can throw you off if you look at like, the mediocre 2-star pitcher that people are going to bid on but drop the next week. Like if that kind of guy goes for $17 and 18 and 16 and 7, like that's where it will go. And after a few weeks, everyone just knows, if I really want this guy, I'm going to bid $22. And it really doesn't fluctuate so much. And same thing with, the first big closer that goes in one league, he'll go for $425. Next, he'll go for $250. The next closer, it's going to be that same thing in that league. Like they don't just all average out. So generally those little clumps of players, like you want to pay more attention to what your league is doing with that type of player, because it does tend to stick around all year.
Absolutely.
Also, I think that player movement tab can be useful. I personally go in after the season and just download a ton of stuff. And I don't always go back and look through it. I always intend to. I don't always. But, I find it valuable, at the start of next season to go back and look at what people were doing, in the first weeks of this past season. And you can, seeing what people did in Fab just throughout the year, having all of that downloaded can really be handy when you just need to, when you're just wondering, well, what do this type of player do about this? And, it's just, you can go and look, and it's helpful.
Yeah. And I try to utilize that in the team stats tab at the end of the season. And I'm trying to figure out this year, a lot of my offseason analysis was to try to see how much stats I drafted versus the amount I fabbed. And it's pretty cool when you can just have the data there and see, again, you can go back to specific moves and just wonder why you dropped this person. Like, what was I thinking when I, dropped this person or picked up this person? And I try to make notes too. I have a notes column after each fab period. So just I put in what was happening that week in the standings and such and such. But
that is useful to go back, and sometimes you'll have it in your mind like you made this huge mistake in Fab, like you dropped someone who ended up having a good year, something like that. And sometimes if you go back and look at it, it wasn't the wrong decision at the time. And like I think it's important to know where did you actually make a mistake, or you should have done this, versus what actually was a fine decision at the time, just didn't work out.
Like,
you mean like when I dropped Spencer Strider because he was a reliever? You mean that? No, it can't be that.
That sounds wrong. I don't
know. One cool feature on your set lineup page, you can go to the search function there, and if you have multiple teams and the lineup block is coming and someone's out, you could press in that person's name and it'll highlight exactly what team they're on, so you can go change that, especially if you do a lot of draft champion, like Dave said, you're in 20 12 team leagues. It really comes in handy. I was hoping I made a suggestion to add a team box to it too. So
I was just about to say that.
Yeah. So if your team goes, gets a rain out or something, you got to just move a whole amount of players on that team. That would be awesome. But I think that's a really good tool to get used to as well. You guys want to talk a little bit about the draft prep and how you walk in, like just some general strategies that you use, just advice to bring to the table at the draft room, and how to bring your A game. Jenny, you want to go first?
Sure. So when I go to the draft, like I said, I've only been doing live main events. So for me, I think that I don't mind having a single screen in front of me. I think that if you're going from drafting with, a 5-screen setup and all of your stuff and your coffee and your iPad and your dog and all of this, it might be a little bit jarring to go into a live draft and just have your one screen in front of you. So I think it's something that you might need to think about, how how you're going to sit there on draft day, what you're going to have in front of you, what information you're going to have, because I think that it can get a little overwhelming if you're trying to look on a bunch of different tabs and, you know, finding information when you have a 1-minute clock. So I think having a plan of what you're going to have in front of you is a good idea. I personally, most of my draft prep involves creating a pretty large spreadsheet. So I will take each of the major projection systems and download them. Specifically, auction values, I think, can be helpful. SGP can be helpful to kind of get a single value for a player. And I personally, I know that, Rob, you like to aggregate projections. I personally don't do that. I think that I like to see, I have a separate column for each set of projections because I like to see what the differences are. So, you know, in the draft, I might resort by different projections just to see who's popping out in the different projection systems. And it doesn't get sort of, you know, watered down that way, I guess. So I like to have them all there to see. And then the other thing that I like to do when I download the projections is I regress them all to per plate appearance stats. So, you know, you take what they're projected for in plate appearances and what they're projecting for in, you know, home runs, for instance, and just divide it. And you get, you know, 0.2 home runs per plate appearance. That's just a made up number. And then go back and multiply it by the plate appearances to get the stat that's there. The advantage to that is that if you think that you have a discrepancy with plate appearances, somebody is getting more playing time, you think they're going to get more playing time than the projection does, you can just change the plate appearance number in your spreadsheet and it updates all of those stats. So I think that that can be helpful. It's also helpful, I think, just to know, you know, which guys are good in steals or home runs or counting stats, you know, per plate appearance. I think that that is a way to sort of get those playing time projections out of the way and see what the base skills are. You know, so many times we think we know who's going to be starting here or there, and it doesn't really work out that way. And it's good to see, you know, who's really who has the skills that will, you know, rise to the top, you know, when playing time gets wonky, you know?
Absolutely.
You know, Rob, it's possible, if not likely, that Jenny just gave away the entire secret to winning at fantasy baseball. Like really, 98.2% of the time when projection systems differ is, if you even out the plate appearances, they're actually the same. Like there's only so much any projection system is going to do. If one is way off in like actual skills, then it's probably not a projection system. It's probably some guy's opinion on something that he made up. And to that point, there's two different kinds of players who maybe say get 450 at bats versus 600 at bats. The guy has 450 at bats because he plays 4 days a week. Then that's what you get, are those stats. But if a guy is projected for 450 at bats because he's going to play for 4 months and sit out for 2 months, well, you get that guy plus 2 months of another guy. And like nobody seems to factor that in. It's like a totally different player. So yeah, do what Jenny said, and you'll be way better at fantasy baseball. You'll probably just win if you do it right. I have nothing else to add.
Well, so Jenny told me about a quote that she heard you say at First Pitch Arizona, and she wanted
probably
to.
Dumb, but go ahead.
And yeah, Jenny.
No, it was good because it made me think. So I sat in your NFBC panel at First Pitch Arizona, which was great, and the room was packed. You were no room, not even standing room only left in that room.
No
but
room at the end, as they say.
Exactly. So, you know, I heard you say that, you know, any strategy can work with the right players. And on its face, that's absolutely true. But, you know, I think that that statement would kind of lead you to think, well, maybe I don't need a strategy at all. I just need to pick my guys. Well, yeah, it made me think because I am not somebody who focuses on player evaluation in my prep very often. I rely on projections. So I think that I don't as much have, you know, my guys as much as some other people do. I sort of, you know, look at players in terms of their categorical, you know, contribution, a little bit more of the Babs system. I don't exactly use Babs, but it's sort of Babs-like. And, you know, I think that it made me think that, you know, am I missing something by not, getting my guys and going more with the strategy approach? But I think that, the way that strategy can be helpful is that it allows, if I feel like if I have a strategy that I believe in, it allows me flexibility later in the draft, or, I don't want to get myself pigeonholed into an area by drafting, I like these, 3 home run hitters right at the top, and they don't contribute any steals. And then later on, I'm taking a Miles Straw type to try and make up for that. And I'm kind of chasing stats here and there. So I think that, a strategy, thinking through some of that stuff and having a strategy like that can, set you up to have a little bit smoother draft. And I think that, you can customize your strategy to what your strengths are. So for me, I am not great at finding closers on the fab wire. So I tend to draft, too early closers. And a lot of people don't like to do that. But I know for me, it saves me sleepless nights, thinking about who to draft, and it saves me fab money, and it saves me, a lot of that stuff. So I personally, am more of a strategy over player person, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so I actually think we're saying the same thing. I probably didn't get to voice the whole thing out. Like, if you are a player, I got my guys. I think you absolutely need and should have a strategy, but I think you should plan that strategy around who are your players. If you're someone who has players, meaning you don't want to just say, oh, I'm going pocket aces, and then figure out who those pitchers are. You want to have your list versus where your KDS is and say, okay, from where I'm drafting, the players at that point that I am most certain are going to do what I think they're going to do are these pitchers. So if I can get 2 of these 4 pitchers, then I'm going pocket aces. But that strategy, pocket aces, only work if those 2 pitchers do well, then it was a great strategy. And if those 2 pitchers do poorly, it was a terrible strategy. Well, no, the strategy, or, I'm getting all my power first and speed later. Yes, if you get your speed later, the strategy worked. If you don't, then the strategy didn't work. I actually think we're kind of saying the same thing. Like,
yeah,
you absolutely need this strategy. But like when people are talking about, I'm doing this strategy, don't say, oh, I heard, so-and-so say they're going to take 2 pitchers in the first 3 rounds. That's what I'm going to do.
Right.
Well, who are the 2? Like, is that because you have, this is what you have, and you don't want to take these pitchers later? Are there speed guys you like later? If so, then maybe your strategy is to wait on speed. If you don't like any speed later, then your strategy flips. Don't make a strategy and then backfit random players into it. Like, build your strategy around who you're going to take.
Yeah, well, if you look at, Nick Pollock and his, he tends to have a strategy of not drafting pitchers in the first several rounds. And that works great for him because he has the deep knowledge of the pitching player pool that I don't necessarily have. So, I am somebody who takes pitchers earlier because that's what works for me. And, Nick is able to do what he's able to do successfully. But, somebody else might take his strategy and not be able to have success with it.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I mean by it. Like, if you hear Nick say, I'm going to wait on pitchers, that doesn't necessarily mean you should, because maybe you're going to take crap ones in the 8th round. He's going to take good ones. Then the strategy is the same, but he wins and you lose the same strategy.
Yeah, I would definitely say my strategies this season has been more focused on the overall the 80th percentile for the last couple seasons, or anything I think the environment might land on. And I'm using my strength as a player and leveraging the ADP and trying to find that balance to like the right path to building a good team. And sometimes it doesn't even matter the players. You're just chasing like a collection of stats. I think Steve Weimer had a great article in the FTN Draft Guide, and it was all about the categorical scarcity. And I think it's a great exercise. Take some time, either through the auction calculator or just look at chunks of ADP and then see what's available in that ADP. And you'll see very quickly where average is available, where stolen bases kind of maybe clumped together. And I think that's more of a solid approach to go into your drafts knowing these things. And then you have a profile player that might fit you know, when you need to pick those players. And I really think that's been helping me out so much in the off season, just getting more of a sense of, you know, what I need to do to build that team. Do you guys use the 80th percentile at all? Do you try to use that?
I use it for targets during the draft. So, you know, I'll just kind of keep track of my team and see where I'm a little ahead or behind, you know, just try and keep it balanced as I'm going. I remember last year, maybe it was even the year before, when you had on, oh Lord, I'm blanking on his name. John Palsma.
Yeah.
Yes. Who said that he uses it in season for weekly totals. And that kind of blew my mind. And I might want to try.
Though. I'm not sure you want to do that.
He is so far ahead of all of us. I can't even. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that there's a lot of ways you can use it. That would be like, I want to try to do that in season thing, but I never quite got it going last year.
I did it this year. It helped me dramatically because I set up each week. I put up my team stats each week into a row. And I had the 80th percentile target next to it. But for the field, like as the weeks were tallying up, I was taking the new 80th percentile. And then I was just trying to see how far my team was from it. And also where I was in the overall. I also think it gave me a good understanding too of when it was time to not play for the overall, because I was keeping track of that. And I knew how much I was moving. You don't have to really break down and do that math. Like is 10 homers a lot? You're kind of seeing it every week. And then I also broke it down to, it's what John said on my pod. Yeah, that you can get an average pretty much of what you're going to need per week to keep up with that 80th percentile. And I think that's crucial because if you use a projection for the week and you see your team is, you know, lacking maybe in some power, then you maybe know that week you can try to stream some power. So I think it's a really good tool to be conscious. You stay just more in tune with your team. Again, like almost paying attention to more of that than actual players, you know, was a big thing I was trying to use last year.
Yeah, you guys have both said something in the last few minutes I think is important to at least be aware of. Like some people who are good and have had success are very much, I have my players, I'm going to go get my players. And some people who are very good and have had a lot of success don't have players at all, and it's just pure math off of either their own projections or even someone else's. There's a lot of ways to skin the old cat, as they say. Do they still say that? I believe they do. I am saying it now. There's a lot of ways to do it, but you got to know who you are. Like how is it that you're doing it, and then do it that way. Like, don't just go into the draft and you get to the 8th round and you're like, this is dumb. I'm gonna take my players now. Like, figure it out.
I very much want to do a draft, and maybe, you know, a less expensive one, obviously, where I remove all the player names from my spreadsheet. And then, you know, decide who I want, then see who the player is and make the pick, and just do it that way so that I have no preconceived, you know, biases about the player's name and what that might mean. And I just think it would be interesting to see what kind of team you end up with, you know, doing something like that.
Probably a good one.
I have a feeling you would. Yeah.
How about you do a fast NFBC 50? You could do it live on live on my podcast.
Fast.
And yeah, fast one night, no slow draft. It would just be 50 picks in one night, Jenny. And you could just, let's see how that works out. I think you
should have done a gladiator that way. That would have been the way to go.
That would have been the way to go. That was a quick flash
in
the pan format. Yeah. That one already filled out 100 leagues, and I don't know if they're going to add any more. And it's going to be war of attrition with that. Dave, what is the best ice cream in the world?
Well, I'm not like a super fancy ice cream person. Like I don't require some, like, I don't have to go to France and like get my ice cream from like a little farmer out in the village. Like I'm totally happy with Ben and Jerry's. I still like, it's just like 4 years in a row I'm just eating New York Super Fudge Chunk most of the time, and I'm thrilled with my life.
The best ice cream is hands down Grater's ice cream in Cincinnati, Ohio, which has moved, you know, to other parts of the country.
Grater's?
But I highly recommend Grater's ice cream. It is a French pot style ice cream. It's extra fatty, which makes it good. You know, it's a high milk fat content and really good chocolate in it. And I highly recommend Grater's.
I will see if we have that around here.
Looks like we got one question in the chat. How many Fab Leagues for each of you? Oh, here's Nick. Sorry, Nick. That's it. We're done.
Well, first of all, it's chocolate fudge brownie. We all know that is the true winner.
Actually,
it's not even close, honestly. It's just like, hey, let's have heaven in a pint. And if you want stuff like hot fudge over that, just be as decadent as possible. Second thing is I actually got a DM from PETA. As you said that, Dave, we can't say skin a cat anymore.
hold the cat, pet the cat.
It's over. It's done. Just like I really hate the term dead cat in stock discussion. And I tried to find like another term for what that is. Essentially something that's coming down, has a little going back up, then keeps falling down. But yeah, let's just avoid cats from our phrases. Be safe.
A lot of ways to feed the cat.
Yeah, a lot of
There
ways
you
to
go.
feed it. Just don't give
There
it the
you
bad
go.
things that it can't eat, though. But yeah.
No,
Be
Anthony, I'm
careful
in
with the
6.
cats, Dave.
No more than 6 Fab Leagues.
No
What
more
I
than
go
6
with.
Fab Leagues. Sorry to interrupt that question, Dave.
That's all
You
right.
said you're doing 2, right?
2. Yeah.
6
Awesome.
for me.
In 6?
Yep.
So how many? I'm gonna be in like 8, but not NFBC. But so some of those are daily, which is why I need to be a consultant. And I do not want to spend any time with Fab, and I applaud all of you that spend time with Fab. Because Dave, when I was at that panel, the same one that Jenny was talking about, I was standing up, arms crossed in the corner because there was nowhere to sit. Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway, the best thing you said, which really was, because we all consider you very much of a legend inside this. You're like, look, all of you are good enough to win NFBC. It's just you have the time a lot to do it. And that resonated so much with me, just like, because I want to have this idea, like, no, if I just pick the right guys and everything is fine, but there's so much time that you invest in it. And if you're not willing to do that, then go,
The
thanks for
best
the money.
player, the best fantasy baseball player is the fantasy baseball player who works the hardest in a smart way that particular season.
There are no shortcuts, just like there isn't not in anything else in life. Rob, Jenny, Dave, you guys are all staples of the high stakes fantasy baseball industry. Cannot thank you enough for giving us all your wise wisdom to have terrible words. Thank you. Thank you so much for being a part of this event.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you.
And hopefully we can raise that money for ALS. So thank you guys.
See you guys.
Thank you, Nick.